You need to listen closely, because what happened in Judge William H. Harrison's courtroom on a rainy Tuesday in Seattle wasn't just a divorce hearing. It was an execution. Titus Clark thought he had committed the perfect crime. He had the billions, the high-powered lawyers, and the ironclad prenup. He threw his wife Aurora out into the street with nothing but a garbage bag of old clothes, laughing as she wept in the rain. He thought she was nobody. He thought she was weak. But when the bailiff read her true birth name aloud in court, the entire room went dead silent. The blood drained from Titus's face, his lawyer dropped his pen, and the judge actually stood up. Titus didn't realize he hadn't just divorced his wife. He had just declared war on the most powerful family in America. The humiliation began on the night of their 5th anniversary. It was supposed to be a celebration. The Clark estate, a sprawling modern mansion overlooking the Puget Sound, was lit up like a beacon of wealth. Titus Clark, the CEO of Clark Tech. A man who had just graced the cover of Forbes for his aggressive acquisition of smaller software firms, stood by the fireplace, swirling a glass of scotch. Aurora came down the stairs wearing the dress Titus had bought her 3 years ago. It was simple, elegant, but worn. She smiled, holding a small, wrapped gift box. She had saved for months from her small allowance to buy him a vintage watch. "Happy anniversary, Titus," she said softly. Titus didn't turn around. He just stared into the fire. Sitting in the armchair next to him was his mother, Victoria Clark, a woman whose smile was as cold as the diamond choker around her neck. And standing by the window looking at her phone was Jessica, Titus's executive assistant. "Is she done yet?" Jessica asked, not even looking up. Titus finally turned. He looked at Aurora, not with hatred, but with something worse, boredom. Absolute crushing indifference. "Aurora," Titus said, taking a sip of his drink. "We're done." Aurora froze. "What, Titus? I don't understand." "The dinner." There is no dinner," Victoria chimed in, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "My son has outgrown you, dear. It happens. You were a quaint little project when he was building his image, the billionaire and the orphan girl. It tested well with focus groups. But now, you're an anchor, and Titus is a rocket." "I have my security team outside," Titus said, placing his glass on the mantel. "You have 10 minutes to pack your personal effects. Anything bought with my money stays. That includes the jewelry, the car, and the clothes on your back, if they're designer. Luckily for you, that dress looks cheap." "Titus, please." Aurora's voice trembled. She took a step forward, reaching for his hand. "I love you. We promised, for better or worse." Titus laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Read the prenup again, Aurora. There is no worse for me. Only for you. I've already filed the papers. You get nothing. No alimony, no assets. You signed it all away the day before the wedding because you were so in love you didn't care about money. Remember." Jessica walked over and slipped her arm through Titus's. "TikTok Aurora. The Uber is waiting at the gate. We didn't want it idling in the driveway." The next 10 minutes were a blur of agony. Under the watchful eye of 2 burly security guards, Aurora stuffed her old jeans, a few t-shirts, and a photograph of her late parents into a black trash bag. She wasn't allowed a suitcase. As she was escorted to the front door, the rain was pouring down in sheets. Titus stood in the doorway, the warm golden light of the mansion framing his silhouette. "Don't try to fight this in court, Aurora," he called out over the thunder. "I have 5 lawyers who bill more in an hour than you'll make in a lifetime. Disappear. Go back to the trailer park. It's where you belong." The heavy oak door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Aurora stood in the dark, soaked to the bone, clutching a garbage bag. She had no money, no home, and no husband. But Titus made one fatal calculation error. He assumed Aurora was the same frightened girl he had met 5 years ago. He didn't know that Aurora had been keeping a secret buried so deep that even the best private investigators hadn't found it. Aurora wiped the rain from her eyes. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a burner phone she had kept hidden in a loose floorboard for 5 years. She dialed a number she had promised herself she would never use. It rang once. "Hello," a deep, raspy voice answered. "Uncle Arthur." Aurora whispered, her voice hardening. "It's time. He threw me out." To understand the weight of that phone call, you have to understand who Aurora really was. For 5 years, the world knew her as Aurora Jenkins. The narrative was perfect, the tragedy case. Titus Clark, the brilliant tech mogul, had rescued her from a life of poverty. He loved telling the story at galas. He would wrap his arm around her and tell investors how he found her working as a waitress in a diner in Ohio, how she had no family, no connections, nothing. It made him look benevolent. It made him look human. And it was mostly true. Aurora was working in a diner. She did live in a small apartment, but the poverty was a choice, a penance. Aurora's mother had run away from home at 19. She had fallen in love with a mechanic, a man her family despised. She had chosen love over a dynasty. For 20 years, Aurora's mother and father lived a simple, happy life, completely cut off from the generational wealth her mother had been born into. They died in a car accident when Aurora was 22. Aurora, grieving and alone, wanted to make it on her own. She wanted to know that if she succeeded, it was because of her, not her last name. So she buried her identity. She became Aurora Jenkins. When she met Titus, she thought he loved her for her. She thought she had found someone who didn't care about status. She was wrong. He loved her because she was a prop, a tax write-off with a heartbeat. The night she was thrown out, Aurora walked 2 miles in the rain to a cheap motel off the highway. She used the last $40 in her pocket to pay for a room that smelled of stale smoke and damp carpet. She sat on the edge of the sagging bed, shivering. Her phone, the burner phone, buzzed. A black town car pulled up outside the motel room window 30 minutes later. It looked out of place among the rusted pickup trucks and sedans. A man stepped out. He was older, perhaps in his 70s, wearing a suit that cost more than the motel itself. He held a large black umbrella. This was Jonathan Pierce, the personal attorney to one of the most reclusive billionaires in the world. He knocked on the door. Aurora opened it. She looked small, wet, and defeated. Jonathan didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her with respect. He bowed his head slightly. "Miss, it has been a long time." "Hello, Jonathan," Aurora said. "Mr. Harrington is furious," Jonathan said, stepping inside and closing the door. "He wanted to come himself, but his health and the secrecy." "I know," Aurora said. "He wants to destroy him, Aurora," Jonathan said, placing a briefcase on the bed. "Titus Clark, the man who treated the granddaughter of Arthur Harrington like garbage. Mr. Harrington is ready to buy Clark Tech and burn it to the ground tomorrow morning." Aurora placed her hand on the briefcase. Her eyes, usually soft and kind, were now cold steel. "No," Aurora said. That's too easy. Titus cares about his reputation. He cares about his intelligence. He thinks he's the smartest man in the room. If we just bankrupt him, he'll spin it. He'll say it was market forces. He'll play the victim. Then what do you want to do? Jonathan asked. He dragged me into court, Aurora said. He wants a public divorce. He wants to humiliate me in front of the press to boost his stock price before the merger. He wants to show the world how he's trimming the fat. Aurora looked at Jonathan. I want to beat him in his arena. I want to go to court. I want him to think he's winning until the very last second. And then I want to take everything. Jonathan smiled. It was a shark's smile. He clicked open the briefcase. Inside wasn't money. It was a stack of documents, old documents, trust funds, stock certificates, and a birth certificate. The merger Titus is planning, Jonathan said, pulling out a file. He's trying to merge Clark Tech with Omnicorp to create a monopoly. It's the deal of the century. It's why he dumped you now. He needs to look single and shark-like for the board. Who owns the majority share of Omnicorp? Aurora asked, though she already suspected the answer. Jonathan slid a paper across the bedspread. A blind trust. The Aurora Trust. Titus has been trying to find out who owns it for 2 years. He thinks it's a group of foreign investors. Aurora looked at the document. The Aurora Trust. Aurora was her middle name. It's me, she whispered. Grandfather put it in my name. Years ago, Jonathan confirmed. He always hoped you'd come back. You own 51% of the company Titus is trying to merge with. Technically, you are already his boss. He just doesn't know it yet. Aurora sat back. The realization washed over her. Titus hadn't just kicked his wife out. He had kicked out the owner of the company he needed to save his own empire. Don't tell him, Aurora said. Not yet. Let him file the papers. Let him parade his lawyers. Let him get us into court. As you wish, Jonathan said. But we need to get you out of here. We have a suite prepared at the Four Seasons. No. Aurora stood up. I stay here, or somewhere similar. Titus has people watching. If I show up at the Four Seasons, he'll get suspicious. I need to play the part of the broken, destitute ex-wife. I need to look like I've lost everything. Jonathan nodded slowly. You have your grandfather's patience. That is a dangerous thing. 3 weeks passed between the night Aurora was thrown out and the first preliminary hearing. In the world of the wealthy, 3 weeks is a lifetime. It is enough time to destroy a reputation, hide assets, and rewrite history. Titus Clark did not waste a single second. He hired a crisis management firm, Blackwood & Associates, known in the industry as the Butchers. Their job was simple: paint Aurora Jenkins not as a victim, but as a leech. On Monday morning, the Seattle Chronicle ran a front-page story, From Diner to Diamonds, how Aurora Jenkins scammed Seattle's most eligible bachelor. The article, filled with anonymous quotes from Titus's friends, claimed Aurora had been unfaithful. It claimed she had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on secret accounts. It claimed she was emotionally unstable and had threatened Titus when he asked for a divorce. None of it was true. But the truth didn't matter. The narrative did. Titus appeared on a morning talk show 2 days later. He sat on a beige couch wearing a soft blue sweater instead of his usual power suit, looking tired and heartbroken. I tried, Titus told the host, looking down at his hands. I really tried to save her from herself. I gave her everything. A home, a life purpose. But you can't help someone who just wants more. I'm just sad it had to end this way. I wish her the best, truly." The audience applauded His Grace. The host nodded sympathetically. Aurora watched the interview from the break room of a laundromat in downtown Seattle. She was staying in a hostel now, keeping up the appearance of destitution. She wore a thrift store hoodie and kept her head down. Her phone buzzed. It was Jonathan Pierce. "He is lying under oath before he even steps into the courtroom," Jonathan said. "Are you watching this?" "I'm watching." Aurora said, her eyes fixed on the TV screen, where Titus was wiping a fake tear. "The board of Omnicorp is watching too," Jonathan noted. "Titus is playing the stable, victimized CEO perfectly. He's trying to show them that he's cutting ties with a liability before the merger. He wants to look decisive." "Let him," Aurora said coldly. "He's digging a hole. Has the team finished the audit?" "Yes. It's worse than we thought, Aurora. Titus isn't just merging with Omnicorp. He's leveraging his own personal assets to push the deal through. He's overextended. If this merger fails, he doesn't just lose the deal. He loses Clark Tech. He's betting the farm because he thinks he's about to become the king of the industry. And the prenup. It's his shield," Jonathan explained. "He's relying on it entirely. He believes that because you signed it, you have no right to look at his financials. He thinks he can divorce you without ever revealing that he's technically bankrupt until the merger goes through." "Then we need a lawyer who looks like he can't read a balance sheet," Aurora said. "I have just the man," Jonathan replied. "Samuel Holloway. The corporate legend. He retired 10 years ago." "Exactly," Jonathan said. "To the world, he's a senile old man who spends his days fishing. To us, he's the only man who knows where all the bodies are buried in corporate law. He's agreed to take the case pro bono. He says he hates bullies." That afternoon, a courier delivered a settlement offer to Aurora's hostel. Titus's lawyer, a sharp-featured man named Gavin Reed, had drafted it. The offer, $51,000 cash, a non-disclosure agreement, and a permanent ban on Aurora ever speaking Titus's name in public. Aurora read it in the lobby of the hostel. She took a pen from the front desk, drew a giant X across the page, and handed it back to the courier. "Tell Mr. Clark I'll see him in court," she said. When Titus received the rejected offer, he was in his office, overlooking the city. Gavin Reed stood nervously by the desk. "She rejected it." Titus laughed, tossing the paper into the trash. 50 grand. That's more money than she's ever seen. "What is she playing at? Maybe she wants to fight," Gavin said. "She hired a lawyer." "Who?" Titus asked, pouring himself a drink. "Some strip mall ambulance chaser." "Samuel Holloway," Gavin said, checking his notes. "I looked him up. He hasn't practiced in a decade. He's 80 years old, Titus. He probably doesn't even know how to use email." Titus grinned. "Perfect. She hired a dinosaur. This is going to be a slaughter. I want cameras in that courtroom, Gavin. I want the world to see me crush them. It'll send a strong message to the Omnicorp board about how I handle loose ends." Titus Clark thought he was walking into a victory lap. He didn't know he was walking into a trap set by the most powerful family in America. The morning of the hearing, the sky over Seattle was a bruised purple. The rain was relentless, hammering against the pavement. The King County Courthouse was surrounded by paparazzi. Titus had leaked the time of the hearing. He wanted an audience. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. Titus stepped out, flanked by Gavin Reed and 2 bodyguards. Titus looked immaculate in a 3-piece charcoal suit. He waved to the cameras, flashing a confident, sad smile. "Titus, is it true she stole your grandmother's ring?" a reporter shouted. "No comment," Titus said solemnly, implying the answer was yes. A few minutes later, a yellow taxi pulled up. Aurora stepped out. She wore a simple grey suit, cheap, ill-fitting, and somber. She had no umbrella. She walked through the rain with her head held high, ignoring the flashes and the shouted questions. Walking beside her was Samuel Halloway. He looked every bit the part Titus had laughed about. He was stooped, wearing a beige trench coat that had seen better days and carrying a battered leather briefcase. He walked slowly, leaning on a cane. Inside Courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was electric. The gallery was packed with reporters and onlookers. Judge William H. Harrison entered. The bailiff shouted, "All rise." Judge Harrison was a man who had seen everything. He was known for two things: his short temper and his hatred for media circuses. He looked at the packed gallery with disdain, then turned his gaze to the two tables. On the left, Titus and Gavin sat with laptops, stacks of crisp files, and 3 junior associates. They looked like an army. On the right, Aurora sat alone with Samuel Halloway. Samuel was fumbling with his glasses, seemingly struggling to unclasp his briefcase. Titus leaned over to Gavin and whispered, "Look at him. He's shaking. This will be over by lunch." "Case number 49201, Judge Harrison boomed. "Clark versus Clark. Petition for dissolution of marriage and enforcement of prenuptial agreement." Gavin Reed stood up, buttoning his jacket. He exuded arrogance. "Your Honor," Gavin began, his voice smooth and practiced. "This is a simple case. Mr. Clark is a self-made man who built an empire. 5 years ago, he married Miss Jenkins. Sorry, Mrs. Clark, without a prenuptial agreement initially, but one was signed shortly after. The terms are clear. In the event of a divorce, both parties leave with what they brought in." Gavin walked toward the bench, handing over a document. Mr. Clark brought in a company now valued at $4 billion. Mrs. Clark brought in debt. Student loans, to be precise. Mr. Clark generously paid those off during the marriage. We are simply asking that the prenuptial agreement be enforced. Mrs. Clark leaves the marital home. She receives no alimony. The marriage is dissolved. Judge Harrison looked at the document. "It seems standard. Is the signature authentic?" "It is." Gavin smiled. "We also have a motion to dismiss any request for financial discovery. Since the prenup separates all assets, Mrs. Clark has no right to see Mr. Clark's private business accounts. It would be a violation of his privacy and trade secrets, especially given the sensitive nature of his current business dealings." The judge nodded. "Mr. Halloway, do you have a response?" Samuel Halloway slowly stood up. He adjusted his glasses. He looked confused. "I'm sorry, Your Honor." Samuel's voice was raspy. I seem to have misplaced my pen." Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Titus smirked openly. Even the judge looked annoyed. "Mr. Halloway," Judge Harrison warned, "this is a courtroom, not a nursing home. Do you have an objection to the motion?" "Yes," Samuel said, finally finding a pen in his pocket. His demeanor suddenly shifted. The confusion vanished, replaced by a razor-sharp clarity. "Yes, I do. We do not contest the validity of the prenup, Your Honor." Gavin looked at Titus and nodded. "We won." "However," Samuel continued, his voice growing stronger, "the prenup states that parties leave with what they brought in and what they acquired independently during the marriage. My client is not asking for Mr. Clark's money. She doesn't want a penny of it. Samuel walked out from behind the table. He didn't use his cane. But Mr. Reed's motion to block financial discovery is interesting. He claims looking at Mr. Clark's finances would violate trade secrets regarding a pending merger with Omnicorp. Is that correct? That is correct, Gavin snapped. It's a multi-billion-dollar merger. A leak could kill the deal. And who is he merging with? Samuel asked innocently. Omnicorp, Gavin said, rolling his eyes. Everyone knows that. Samuel turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense argues that we cannot enforce the prenup without establishing the true ownership of the assets involved. Mr. Clark claims he is the sole owner of Clark Tech. He claims he is the king of the industry. But if he is lying about his financial solvency, then he entered into this divorce under false pretenses to defraud my client of her personal property. Defraud. Titus stood up, angry. I picked her up from a trailer park. What property could she possibly have that I would want? Sit down, Mr. Clark, Judge Harrison barked. Samuel smiled. It was the smile of a hunter who had just heard the trap snap shut. Mr. Clark asks a good question, Samuel said. What property does Aurora possess? Well, according to the prenup, any inheritance or trust acquired by either party remains theirs alone. Is that right, Mr. Reed? Yes, Gavin said, looking confused. But she's an orphan. She has no inheritance. Are you sure about that? Samuel walked back to his table and reached into his battered briefcase. He didn't pull out a handwritten note. He pulled out a thick file bound in blue velvet. The seal on the front was gold wax, the seal of the Royal Bank of Scotland. The room went quiet. That kind of file wasn't something you bought at Office Depot. That was old money. Your Honor, Samuel said, Mr. Clark is trying to merge his company with Omnicorp. He believes Omnicorp is owned by a blind trust of foreign investors. He has been negotiating with this trust for 6 months. Titus's face went pale. How did the old man know that? But Samuel continued, Mr. Clark failed to do his due diligence. If he had, he would know that the Aurora Trust, which owns 51% of Omnicorp, is not a group of foreign investors. Samuel handed the blue file to the bailiff to give to the judge. The Aurora Trust is the sole property of Aurora Harrington, the granddaughter of Arthur Harrington, the sole heir to the Harrington Steel and Tech dynasty. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a vacuum. Judge Harrison opened the file. His eyes widened. He looked up at Aurora, who was sitting calmly, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a queen in exile. Mr. Clark, the judge said, his voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the silent room. You just tried to evict the majority shareholder of the company you are trying to merge with. Titus stood up. He was shaking. That's a lie. She's nobody. She's Aurora Jenkins. Aurora finally stood up. She looked Titus dead in the eye. Jenkins was my mother's name, she said, her voice clear and carrying to the back of the room. I used it to see if you could love me without the billions. You failed. And now, Samuel Halloway interrupted, his voice booming like thunder. We are countersuing, not for alimony, but for hostile corporate takeover. Since Mr. Clark has admitted under oath that his company is leveraged against this merger, and since the merger requires the approval of the majority shareholder, Aurora smiled, I'm denying the merger, Titus, and I'm calling in your debts today. Pandemonium broke out. It wasn't a murmur. It was an explosion. Reporters were shouting into their phones, scrambling to be the first to break the headline, Clark Tech CEO divorcing heir to Harrington fortune. Judge Harrison, banged his gavel so hard the wooden handle cracked. "Order, order in this court, or I will clear the gallery," he roared. Titus Clark collapsed into his chair. He looked like a man who had been punched in the gut. He turned to Gavin Reed, his high-priced lawyer. "Fix this," Titus hissed, sweat beading on his forehead. "Gavin, do something, object." "Say it's a fabrication." Gavin Reed, who had spent the last hour looking at Aurora with disdain, was now looking at her with terrified awe. He started packing his bag. "Fix it," Gavin whispered, his voice trembling. "Titus, you just sued the Harrington family. Do you know who Arthur Harrington is? He eats law firms like mine for breakfast. You didn't tell me you were leveraged against her trust. You lied to counsel." "I didn't know," Titus screamed. "Counsel approaches the bench," Judge Harrison yelled. Aurora and Samuel Halloway walked forward calmly. Titus and Gavin scrambled to join them. "Your Honor," Samuel said, his voice steady. "My client, Mrs. Clark, or Ms. Harrington as she prefers, is currently the holder of a secured note for $300 million loaned to Clark Tech by the Aurora Trust. This loan has a change of control clause. By filing for divorce, Mr. Clark has triggered a restructuring event. We are calling the loan." Titus's eyes bulged. "You can't do that. We have 30 days. "Read the fine print, Titus," Aurora said softly. "The grace period is void if the borrower is involved in legal proceedings that threaten the company's solvency. This divorce is that proceeding." "I withdraw the petition," Titus shouted, turning to the judge. "Your Honor, I withdraw the divorce papers. We're not divorcing. I love my wife." The gallery gasped. The audacity was breathtaking. Aurora laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "It's too late, Titus. You filed the papers. It's public record. And I am countersuing for divorce on the grounds of adultery and fraud. You wanted out. You're out." Judge Harrison looked at Titus with pure disgust. "Mr. Clark, you cannot unring a bell just because you don't like the sound of it. We are taking a 1-hour recess. When we return, I expect you to have a valid reason why I shouldn't grant Ms. Harrington's motion to freeze all your assets immediately. Court is in recess." As the judge left, Titus lunged toward Aurora. 2 bailiffs stepped in his way, hands on their holsters. "Aurora." "Wait," Titus pleaded over the heads of the guards. "Please, let's talk. Just 5 minutes. No lawyers. Just us. Honey. Please." Aurora stopped. She turned slowly. "5 minutes," she said to the bailiffs. "Let him through." They moved to a small consultation room off the main hallway. The moment the door closed, Titus's demeanor changed. He tried to turn on the charm, the same charm he had used to seduce her 5 years ago. "Aurora, look," he said, pacing the small room. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I was stressed. The merger, the pressure, it made me crazy, but we can fix this. Think about it. You and me, Clark and Harrington. We could rule the world, baby. We'd be the biggest power couple on the planet." He reached out to touch her arm. Aurora didn't flinch. She just looked at his hand until he pulled it back. "You threw me out in the rain with a garbage bag, Titus," she said quietly. "I was putting on a show for the board," Titus lied, his eyes desperate. "I had to look tough. I was going to bring you back once the deal closed. I swear." Aurora reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She pressed play on a recording. It was Jessica's voice. "Is she done yet?" Then Titus's voice. "You're an anchor, and Titus is a rocket." Aurora stopped the recording. I recorded everything that night, Aurora said, and I sent a copy to your mother 10 minutes ago. She just texted me. Apparently she's very disappointed in your lack of judgment. Not your cruelty, mind you, just your stupidity for dumping a Harrington. Titus fell to his knees, literally. The man who had been on the cover of Forbes was kneeling on the dirty linoleum floor of a courthouse. Aurora, they'll kill me, he wept. If the loan is called, the stock goes to zero. I leveraged the house, the cars, everything. I'll be destitute. I'll be you. No, Titus, Aurora said, opening the door to leave. You won't be me, because when I had nothing, I still had my dignity. You have neither. She walked out. In the hallway, Titus's phone began to ring. It was the chairman of the board of Clark Tech. Titus answered, his hand shaking. Hello, Titus. The chairman's voice was ice cold. Don't bother coming back to the office. The board has voted. You're out. Effective immediately. Security is packing your box. You can't do that. I'm the CEO. Not anymore. Omnicorp just sent over a purchase offer for the company. They're buying us out at a premium. But the condition of the sale is your immediate removal and the liquidation of your shares to cover the debt you owe the Aurora Trust. Who signed the purchase offer? Titus whispered, though he knew the answer. Aurora Harrington. The recess ended, but the atmosphere in King County Superior Courtroom 4B had shifted fundamentally. Before the break, it had felt like a divorce hearing. Now it felt like a coroner's inquest. The air was thick, suffocating, and silent. Titus Clark sat at the defendant's table, his hands trembling slightly as he clasped them over a stack of useless files. He looked to his left, expecting to see Gavin Reed, the shark of a lawyer who had promised him a total victory just that morning. Instead, the chair was empty. A junior associate, a young man who looked barely out of law school and terrified, slid into the seat. Where is Gavin? Titus hissed, sweat beading on his upper lip. Mr. Reed had a sudden conflict of interest arise, the associate whispered, refusing to make eye contact. He's recused himself. I'm here to facilitate the transition. Transition? Titus's voice cracked. He's abandoning me. All rise, the bailiff bellowed, cutting off Titus's panic. Judge William H. Harrison swept back into the room. If he looked annoyed earlier, he now looked like Old Testament judgment personified. He didn't sit immediately. He stood behind his high bench, looking down at Titus Clark with a gaze that could strip paint. Be seated, the judge said, his voice deceptively calm. Aurora sat perfectly still on the plaintiff's side. She hadn't looked at her phone. She hadn't spoken to the press. She just watched Titus, her face a mask of serene, terrifying patience. Samuel Halloway, her deceptively frail attorney, was arranging his papers with the slow, deliberate movements of an executioner, sharpening an axe. We have reviewed the motion for immediate asset seizure filed by the plaintiff. Judge Harrison began putting on his spectacles. And we have reviewed the financial disclosures forced by Mr. Halloway. The judge picked up a document, the prenuptial agreement Titus had been so proud of. Mr. Clark, the judge said, addressing Titus directly, you petitioned this court to enforce this document strictly. You wanted, and I quote, a total and absolute separation of financial identities. You wanted to ensure that no debt asset or liability was shared between spouses. Is that correct? Titus stood up, his legs feeling like jelly. Yes, Your Honor. But the circumstances have not changed. The judge interrupted, his voice hardening. Only your understanding of them has. The judge turned a page. According to the evidence provided by the Aurora Trust, which is the legal property of your wife, Clark Tech, is currently in default on a $300 million bridge loan. A loan you personally guaranteed. I can restructure it, Titus pleaded. I just need time, the merger. There is no merger. Samuel Halloway spoke up. His voice wasn't raspy anymore. It was booming. He stood without his cane. My client, the majority shareholder of the target company, has formally rejected the acquisition. The deal is dead, which means the bridge loan is due. In full. Immediately. Titus looked at Aurora. Aurora, please. You're killing the company. I'm not killing the company, Titus, Aurora said, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. I'm foreclosing on it. Judge Harrison nodded. Under the terms of the loan agreement, and in strict adherence to your prenuptial agreement, your wife is not liable for your debts. However, as your creditor, she is entitled to the collateral you pledged. Mr. Halloway, please read the list of seized assets. Samuel picked up a sheet of paper. He didn't read it quickly. He savored every item. To satisfy the outstanding debt, Samuel read, the Aurora Trust is hereby seizing the borrower's primary residence, the estate at 4400 View Ridge. That's my house, Titus shouted. My grandfather built that house. It was your house, Samuel corrected. It is now Aurora's house. Moving on. The 2023 Aston Martin DBS. The Gulfstream G650 private aircraft. The vacation property in Aspen. And of course the entirety of Mr. Clark's remaining stock portfolio in Clark Tech, effectively transferring 100% controlling interest to the creditor. The gallery gasped. In a matter of seconds, Titus Clark had gone from a billionaire to a man who didn't even own the shoes on his feet. This is insane. Titus slammed his hand on the table. You're leaving me with nothing. This is a divorce court, not a bankruptcy hearing. Actually, Judge Harrison intervened. Because you intertwined your personal assets with your corporate debts, it is effectively both. You played a high-stakes game, Mr. Clark. You lost. The judge closed the file. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The divorce is granted. Ms. Harrington is restored to her maiden name. The assets are transferred effective immediately. Security is currently changing the locks on the View Ridge estate as we speak. The judge looked ready to bang the gavel to adjourn, but Aurora raised her hand. Your Honor, Aurora said softly. Yes, Ms. Harrington. There is one final matter regarding the distribution of personal property. The prenuptial agreement has a clause regarding personal effects, Clause 14. Titus looked up, confused. That was the clause he had used to kick her out. Mr. Clark was very specific. Aurora continued, standing up and walking around the table. He insisted that in the event of a separation, the departing party could only take what fit into a single bag. No suitcases, no boxes. Only immediate personal effects. She reached under the defense table and pulled out a black, heavy-duty, hefty garbage bag. It crinkled loudly in the silence. She walked over to Titus's table. The cameras were flashing blindingly fast now. I didn't want to be in breach of contract, Titus, Aurora said, her voice devoid of malice, which somehow made it worse. So I had my team pack for you. She dropped the garbage bag onto the mahogany table in front of him. It landed with a pathetic thud. It contains your gym clothes, Aurora listed, your shaving kit, and that blue sweater you wore on television when you told the world I was a gold digger. I don't want it in my house. Titus stared at the black plastic. It was the exact same brand of bag he had forced into her hands on that rainy night. Aurora, he whispered, his voice broken. I'm leaving you exactly how you found me. Titus," she said, "or rather, exactly how you left me. Alone. With nothing but the clothes on your back. The only difference is I had the strength to survive it. I guess we'll see if you do." "Court is adjourned." Judge Harrison slammed the gavel. The chaos was instant. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Aurora's security team, massive men in dark suits, formed a wedge around her, guiding her toward the exit. Titus grabbed the garbage bag, because he instinctively realized it was literally the only thing he owned, and scrambled after her. He pushed past the junior associate, who was already on his phone, looking for a new job. "Aurora!" "Wait, just listen." Titus burst out of the courtroom doors into the hallway. He looked wild, his tie crooked, clutching the trash bag to his chest. Aurora stopped near the elevators. She turned. The flash bulbs popped, capturing the image that would define the decade, the Ice Queen immaculate in grey, and the fallen king holding his trash. "What am I supposed to do?" Titus cried out, ignoring the cameras. "You took my car, you took my cards, how do I even get out of here?" Aurora looked at him with a pity that cut deeper than hate. "You're a smart man, Titus. You're an innovator, right? Figure it out." She stepped into the elevator. "Oh," she added, holding the door open for a split second. "I almost forgot. Jessica is waiting for you in the loading dock. I fired her 20 minutes ago. And since her company lease on the Mercedes was terminated, along with her employment, she's on foot too. Maybe you can share a cab, if you have any cash." The elevator doors slid shut, severing the connection forever. Titus stood alone in the hallway. The adrenaline faded, replaced by the crushing weight of reality. He looked down at the garbage bag in his arms. He could feel the shape of his sneakers through the plastic. He walked slowly toward the exit. Outside, the Seattle rain was pouring down in sheets, just as it had on the night of their anniversary. But this time there was no town car waiting for him, no driver, no umbrella. He saw Jessica standing by the curb, shivering in a thin coat, furiously typing on her phone. When she saw him, saw the bag, the panic, the ruin, she didn't run to him. She put her phone in her pocket, turned her back, and started walking down the wet sidewalk alone. She knew a sinking ship when she saw one. Titus stepped off the curb. The cold water soaked through his expensive Italian loafers instantly. He looked up at the grey sky, let the rain hit his face, and realized for the first time in his life that the storm didn't care how much money he used to have. He gripped the garbage bag tighter and started walking. He had a long way to go. The collapse of the Clark Empire wasn't just a business failure. It was a dissection. In the weeks following the verdict, the dismantling of Titus's life was public, brutal, and total. Because Titus had fought so aggressively to keep his finances separate via the prenup, the bankruptcy court showed him no mercy. His personal debts were his alone. The separation of assets he had used as a shield became the sword that gutted him. The auction of his estate was the social event of the season. His collection of vintage Ferraris was sold to pay off legal fees. His bespoke suits, monogrammed with RS, were sold in bulk lots to second-hand retailers. Even the heavy oak desk, where he had sat to fire Aurora's predecessor, was carried out by movers purchased by a startup founder who had no idea who Titus Clark was. Aurora, meanwhile, didn't just take the company, she exorcised it. On her first day as CEO of the newly rebranded Aurora Systems, she walked into the lobby. A massive oil painting of Titus hung behind the reception desk. She didn't shout, She didn't make a scene. She simply pointed at it and whispered to the facility manager, "Burn it." She gutted the toxic bro culture Titus had cultivated. The executive washroom which Titus had installed with gold fixtures was turned into a lactation room for working mothers. The junior engineers Titus had fired for being too old were rehired with back pay. Aurora wasn't just running a company, she was proving a point. You don't need to be a tyrant to be a titan. As for Jessica, the moment the company credit card was declined at a sushi restaurant, her loyalty evaporated. She didn't stick around for the downfall. Rumor had it, she moved to Miami 3 days after the verdict, latching onto a cryptocurrency promoter who was currently under investigation by the SEC. She was a survivor of the parasitic kind. 6 months later, a cold, biting wind blew through the darker streets of downtown Seattle. Far away from the glittering skyscrapers of the tech district, in a cramped, dusty storefront nestled between a pawn shop and a liquor store, a bell chimed. The sign above the door read, "PC Doctor. Fast repairs." Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and burning solder. "I said I need it by noon, buddy," a customer shouted, slamming a cracked iPad onto the glass counter. "My kid needs it for school. Stop wasting my time." Behind the counter sat a man in a faded blue polo shirt. His name tag was crooked. It read, Richie. Titus Clark looked 10 years older. His hair, once perfectly coiffed, was thinning and grey at the temples. The confident, shark-like glint in his eyes was gone, replaced by the dull, flat look of a man who is simply trying to get through the hour. "I'm working on it as fast as I can," Titus said, his voice quiet. He picked up a tiny screwdriver, his hands shaking slightly, a tremor that had developed after the stress of the bankruptcy. "Yeah." "Well, work faster," the customer sneered, scrolling through his phone. "It's not rocket science. You're just fixing a screen." Titus didn't reply. He couldn't. The irony was too thick to swallow. He had once engineered the merger of billion-dollar software architectures. Now he was being yelled at for not gluing a piece of glass fast enough. In the corner of the shop, a small, static-filled television was playing the midday news. And finally today, the news anchor announced, her voice cheerful. Local tech giant Aurora Systems has just unveiled their new headquarters. CEO Aurora Harrington was on site to cut the ribbon. Titus froze. The screwdriver slipped in his hand. He looked up at the grainy screen. There she was, Aurora. She looked breathtaking. She wasn't wearing the diamonds he used to buy her to show her off. She was wearing a simple white suit, looking radiant and powerful. She stood on a podium, surrounded by the very employees Titus had treated like dirt. They were cheering for her. A reporter on the screen thrust a microphone toward her. "Ms. Harrington, your company has seen a 200% increase in stock value since taking over from the previous administration. What is your secret?" Aurora smiled at the camera. It felt like she was looking right through the TV, right into the dusty repair shop, right into Titus's soul. "My secret," Aurora said, her voice steady. "I learned that people aren't assets to be acquired or liabilities to be discarded. They are the foundation. The previous CEO, he forgot that. He thought he could build a castle on quicksand. But when the rain comes, quicksand always washes away." Titus stared at the screen. The memory of the rain on that night, the night he threw her out, washed over him. The cold, the cruelty, the garbage bag. "Hey, Earth to Richie," the customer barked, snapping his fingers in Titus's face. Are you gonna stare at the TV or fix my damn iPad? Titus blinked, snapping back to his reality. He looked at the rude customer. For a fleeting second, the old Titus wanted to scream, to declare who he was, to shout that he used to be a king. But he wasn't a king. He was just a guy named Richie with a mounting pile of rent due and no one to call. Sorry, Titus whispered, looking down at the broken device in his hands. I'm getting back to work. He bent his head, focusing on the tiny, broken screws, while on the screen above him, the woman he threw away continued to change the world. Titus Clark made the fatal mistake of confusing net worth with self-worth. He believed that his money gave him the right to treat people like trash, never realizing that the trash he discarded was the only thing holding his life together. In the end, Aurora didn't destroy Titus. She simply let him be exactly who he was. She removed the money, the status, and the protection, and revealed the empty man underneath. It serves as a brutal reminder to us all. Be careful who you step on while you're climbing the ladder, because you never know who you'll meet on the way down or who owns the ladder. What a ride. Now I have to ask you, do you think Titus's punishment fit the crime? Should Aurora have helped him in the end, or did he deserve to end up in that repair shop? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps us create more stories like this. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. We have a story coming up next week about a cheating husband who tried to hide his assets in Bitcoin, only to realize his wife had the password. Trust me, it's wild. Thanks for watching. Stay humble, and I'll see you in the next one.